My name is John Douglas, and this is my co-host, Daniel Lowber. This is a show about social issues, about pop culture, and anything that really affects us as citizens of Las Vegas, citizens of the world. Today we're going to start with something that's markedly unfunny. We're going to discuss the issues of race in the United States after the recent atrocity killing in Charleston. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it. Recently, why don't you go ahead and talk about it, because...
Yeah, and I believe it was on Wednesday in Charleston, South Carolina. This racist piece of shit walked into a black church, sat in Bible study with him for an hour, started ranting about black people, and eventually said, "I want to kill black people. You guys got to go." And then he just opened fire, reloaded like 5 times, killed 9 people. It was 6 women and 3 men. Could have been the other way around, including the pastor. And it's kind of interesting. It came out later that that church has been around for almost 200 years. It was founded in 1816, and it's been attacked numerous times over the years. And each time it's bounced back. But so I don't know if this kid deliberately chose it. He's only, I think he's 21 years old. I'm not going to dignify him with giving him a fucking name or a voice or a platform. But it was fucking sick. I haven't seen anything like that. You got to go back to me. I'm sure there's events that I'm not aware of, being a privileged white man, but got to go back to the 60s and 70s, and they were blowing up churches.
So this is in the context of the recent state-sponsored, if you will, police violence that's plagued the United States, and what has come to the forefront of popular news, 24-hour news cycles is the divisiveness that does still exist, as if people didn't know it wasn't necessarily in the forefront. And just this happening in that climate after Ferguson, after killings in New York and Ohio. This is I feel like a bubbles burst here, and we are either going to have to address it in a way that isn't a partisan issue, isn't a white or a black issue, isn't a specific issue. This is an American thing. We need to fix it. We're fucked.
Yeah, it's man, the fact that people start spinning it fucking immediately and trying to say, oh, it was about religion because it happened at a church, and there's just been this rising tide of anti-Christian sentiment over it. Like, no, man, like nobody's running around saying like Christians got to go. We got to get rid of them. Like nobody has said that in this country ever. You got to go to countries like Russia and China where they had pogroms against religions, and people love to play the persecuted here. For what reason? I don't know. And when it doesn't even pertain to them, it just makes me ill. You know, I've got almost everybody of our generation has friends or family or loved ones who are of a non-white ethnic background or a non-straight sexual orientation. And the fact that that still happens here, and it's not that surprising, to be honest. It's sickening that it happened. It's sickening that people try to spin it into being a religious thing instead of what it clearly is, which is a racial thing. But when you look at it, okay, if I was a racist and I was sitting around and I was watching cops shoot a 12-year-old kid in Ohio, and then the only thing that the news wants to talk about after is that his dad sold pot. Holy shit. What does that have to do with the fact that the cops executed a 12-year-old? Right. And they're charging him with murder, which, again, I don't know if it's going to turn out to be like an Eric Garner situation in New York, where the reason that the guy wasn't indicted is because they tried to charge him with murder, knowing that they're not going to be able to prove that. Because right. I don't think even Eric Garner's wife or widow now would tell you that the cop showed up trying to intending to kill him. Right. Murder is very hard to prove. It recklessly causing somebody's death is by definition manslaughter, and that's easy to prove. But if you're the prosecutor and your buddies are the cops, your incentive is to be tough on crime, so you can say, brag to your constituents about how you're concerned you are about their safety. So you charge them with murder, knowing that they're going to get off, knowing that you can keep that relationship with your police buddies going forward. So if I was sitting back and I was a racist and I was watching cops get away with killing unarmed black people in New York, in Missouri, in Ohio, in California, in essentially every state in the union, it seems like, then why wouldn't I think I could just go massacre some black people? The thing that surprised me is that he thought he would start a race war. I don't know how black people are being so forgiving about this shit, man. I mean, even the families of the victims at that church shooting came out right afterwards, and a good half of them were on record as saying that they forgive the guy. Well, that just blows my mind.
And that shows you the quality of the communities that are involved in this violence. Not to switch gears too much, but if you look at the Charlie Hebdo incident, where the editorial staff of the French magazine, after they published pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, cartoons,
yeah,
right, very comically satirical, right? It's the French's Onion, if you will. Their next issue that came out directly after this incident was a magazine and saying, "We forgive you," you know.
Yeah, well, what kills me too about that is the way people spin it, like, oh, you know, Charlie Hebdo can be like a racist and a homophobic magazine. I mean, first of all, it's a satire magazine. Second of all, so what? If you have free speech, let's not forget the legendary quote, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. People are going out blowing up Ku Klux Klan meeting places. Like, they're vile. They're garbage. I don't like them. I'm not going to kill them. It's their right to free speech. As long as you're not hurting anybody, you know, Oliver Wendell Holmes, his classic quote, like, the right to swing your fist ends where another man's face begins. Is kind of how he defined free speech. He was when it came up with that. You're not allowed to shout fire in a crowded theater. You're specifically doing it to cause mayhem. Well, now, if you're part of a hate group like that, you're obviously intending to hurt people, but just marching around and saying hateful things does not warrant capital punishment.
Right.
So the fact that Charlie Hebdo may or may not be a racist or a homophobic publication, so what? It doesn't justify their employees being massacred. The Ku Klux Klan being a racist, homophobic organization does not justify a Klan chapter being massacred.
Right.
You might fantasize about it, but you would never do it.
Right.
That's everybody's protections have to be equal, or the fabric of society will not hold. The center will not hold. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's an apocalyptic scenario we're heading towards, but it just, the last couple of years, man, it's just been accelerating, just shooting.
It's almost a fatigue where you see it so often that you become inured to the frequency with which it happens, which is awful. I mean, that's the scenario that people get into when they're refugees or when it's a wartime situation. They're so inured to the violence because it's ubiquitous. They can't do anything with that.
Yeah, it's like, what's it going to take? Okay, unarmed black people being killed, unarmed black kids, 12-year-olds being killed, a movie theater being shot up, a school being completely massacred in Sandy Hook.
Right.
What is it going to take for people to put in some fucking gun controls, to put in some actual mental health reforms, to put in some actual prison reforms? Like, if people don't want to respond and change the stuff, if they just want to continue to kowtow to special interests, then good luck to them. You know, I'll just walk around in my bulletproof vest and hope for the best, because I don't know. We have a societal responsibility. FDR said the true test of our progress is not in whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but whether we provide enough to those who have too little. And that dude is one of the richest elitists who's ever held office in this country, and he's still ushered through Social Security and Medicare. And we have a responsibility to allow people to be safe. And if you're going to allow restrictions on air travel, like the institution of TSA and metal detectors, and take off your shoes and do all the shit so hopefully we can fly on planes without getting them blown up, there's got to be an equal protection extended to just walking around and living your life, going to church, going to school, going to see a movie, and not having to roll the dice that some fucking maniac is going to blow you up or take a shot at you just because he has access to those materials.
Right.
You know, people love to point out statistics in other countries, like, oh, what about that country, or what about that school in Sweden, I believe it was a few years ago, that it was that summer camp, and that guy went out there and just massacred the whole island.
Islamic centered summer camp.
It wasn't an Islamic summer camp, and the shooter was not Islamic. He was a straight up racist.
No, it was, but the targeted population was primarily people of Islamic religion.
Yeah, and he shot a bunch of white kids too. So regardless of what his primary aim was, he killed a bunch of people.
Regardless, yeah.
Those incidents are very few and far between. And you could say, yeah, obviously it's not good, but what is their proposed solution? Arm the teachers? What is more likely? As a former professor and as the spouse of a teacher, what is more likely? That a school shooting happens and John Rambo, you know, civics teacher is able to stop it, or some teacher who didn't go through some mental health screening process has a bad day, has a bad week, some kid pops off and they pistol whip him or shoot him. I submit that the latter scenario is far more likely than the former.
What you're going to see in a situation like that, and that's really, being a former educator, being someone who's taught for 7-8 years, both high school, college level, and those are two separate things because there's two sets of criteria. But looking at high schools or non-upper education, non-college, you've got a situation where that's constantly an issue, is how do we protect the children? And then there's lockdown procedures, there are code reds. We're trained to do everything possible to mitigate loss of life. But yeah, that's been proposed so many times and been a conversation so many times. What do you do? Do you give teachers guns? And what would happen? What would happen? Without a doubt, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. You would have a teacher who is at the end of their tether because teachers are underpaid, because
overworked, understaffed,
students just know how to tap on that last fucking nerve.
Yeah.
And it's not an if, it's a when.
It's statistically a certainty.
Someone's gonna shoot a kid.
There's way more teachers than there are school shooters. So statistically, it's a guarantee that eventually one of them snaps and shoots a kid.
And it's just such a rife petri dish of possibility that school system right now, the way it's set up is, yeah, absolutely it would happen. It would happen somewhere. It would happen a couple places. And you would see that within, 6 months of that policy, it would have to be abolished because it just wouldn't work.
And the fact that that's the proposed solution, as opposed to maybe we should restrict access to guns. Everyone should have a gun.
Right.
Well, people would be more polite then. Really, I think it just becomes like the Old West, and whoever shoots first fucking wins.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if people remember, that used to be the scenario in this country. Everybody in the Old West had guns, and people settled their differences with guns.
Right.
So it's not like that people were more polite. It's just the standards and the thresholds for when violence was acceptable and allowed to occur were way lower. Somebody called you a liar, you could kill them and you would be justified under the law. Somebody stole your horse or your cow, you could kill them and you were justified under the law. Now, different criteria. Back then, you stole somebody's horse, that was a means of transportation. You may be condemning them to death or their ability to earn a living.
Yeah.
Even still, the fact that the opposite arguments are made for potential solutions, like guns are being used to kill people. Okay, well, rather than limit guns, let's increase the number of guns because then there's more probability that somebody will shoot back. So, and crazy is crazy, man. I mean, the reason that a lot of these shooters end up doing suicide by cop, they know that somebody's eventually going to show up with guns. The fact that the guns are eventually going to show up are not a deterrent.
Right.
So
yeah, that's an exit strategy. I mean, if you look at Sandy Hook, the NRA had a conference that week in which they did not cancel.
No, they scheduled it.
They scheduled it
after that, when they didn't have one scheduled.
Right, and it was a fucking circle jerk for them to get together and say, look, guns aren't the problem. We need to have more guns, arm more teachers, and they used it as a platform to push that position in the wake of little children being murdered with a semi-automatic assault rifles.
That's what kills me. I mean, like, okay, you get rid of guns. What's the alternative? People have knives and like bows. Now, the nice part is you can outrun somebody with a knife. You can bob and weave, and you got to be really, really good and put a lot of years into it to try and go kill somebody with a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
It takes anybody with an ability to hold their hand relatively steady, up to like Michael J. Fox with Parkinson's, can wipe out a school or a cinema.
Yeah.
Because you pick up a gun, point, bang. Like it's point and click. It's the original point and click. It's idiot proof. Unless it jams or the safety's on, which anybody can kill somebody with a gun.
It takes away that evolutionary necessity for strength to defeat your enemy.
Yeah.
And I mean that's a cultural evolution in the sense that, hey, develop your intelligence and someone else's intelligence to develop that weapon, a John Colt or a Barrett, they're the intelligent ones, not the people using the guns. And unfortunately, we have such free access. And I'm a gun owner. We both own guns. Yeah. I've never used it. I've never had to use it. There was an incident where there was a person on bath salts or some sort of drugs outside of my house who got into a scuffle with a police officer, and that was the only time where I thought I would have to use a gun, because I wasn't going to sit there and have this crazy guy take the cop's gun and kill him. But thank God that never had to happen. I don't know what I would do in that situation, but I mean, it is true that most most deaths in a household with a firearm come from someone shooting their loved one. I mean, it's just a statistic. So more guns aren't the problem. I mean, more guns aren't the solution to this problem.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers from every single country that has strict gun laws, bear it out. Way less incidences of violent crime, way fewer incidences of gun violence. Right. I mean, fucking UK, most of the cops don't have guns.
Yeah, they have special armed unit response teams, like SWAT.
Exactly. And how often it just, I don't know, man. I'm reaching the end of my rope, and it's not affecting me. Like, it's not let's be honest, like, we're straight middle class white dudes. Like, this doesn't impact our day-to-day lives at all.
Yeah.
Like, we're the right color, we're the right sexual orientation, we're the right income bracket. Like, if we dropped heroin on the ground, the cops would be like, "Excuse me, sir, I believe you dropped your heroin." Like, that's far more likely than any kind of harassment for us to feel. And I don't know, I can't fathom how painful and enraging it must be for people who are not in my particular demographic, who aren't straight white guys, to go through this day after day and week after week and month after month and year after year.
Well, it's ridiculous. You know, I remember I'm in recovery from opioid addiction. It's not something that that I have a problem discussing. I share it openly with people who have you know, any sort of connection with my life. It's something that I have overcome and I feel good about. But I can recall a time a couple years ago, not so long ago, during that active addiction, where I was able to get away with ridiculous and flagrant things that an African-American person, a Hispanic person would never be able to get away with. I remember, you know, driving openly with guns and weapons and drugs and being pulled over even, but because I was wearing an Argyle sweater and I was the right color and I knew how to say the right things to the police officer, I didn't even get a ticket for the light I ran, let alone get my car searched. So I feel... And
that was with heroin and guns. Had you been black with a joint and a BB gun, they may have just killed you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, and it's the sort of thing where going through it, I felt how wrong it was, because I knew that at the same time, there were people all around me who were different colors or ethnicities that were being persecuted for far less offenses than what I was doing. But, you know, what do you do? What do you do except feel, you know, impotent rage about the situation?
I don't know what you and I can do, man. Voting doesn't seem to get the job done. Killing people doesn't seem to get the job done. I don't know what it's going to take for real meaningful change. Yeah. No, I mean, hopefully it's more like society has improved so much in the last 40 years, from black people being able to vote and own property, and hey, you can marry somebody of a different color, and you're not going to go to prison, to gay rights accelerating its progress over the last few years. I mean, can you imagine transphobic being a cause 5 years ago?
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was around, and there were transgendered people, but the fact that now there's stigma against people who openly discriminate is fantastic. Now, the problem with that is then you see all the shit. It's like the feelings go away; it just goes underground. So then you get into from, hey, boy, get off my porch, and don't, you know. I was reading this article recently where I'm from in Washington. There's an agricultural town called Pasco. It's part of the Tri-Cities, Richland, Kennewick, and Pasco. That's like 60-70% Latino. Mm-hmm. And this guy, I remember, was moving there back in the 70s, and there was a sign on the bridge that said, hey, don't come across this bridge after dark. And that was for anybody who was non-white. So...
well, in Florida, you know, my wife, Jennifer, and I grew up in Florida a certain amount of time, but she grew up there her entire life. There were communities that were specifically sundown communities. If you were not white, you needed to be gone by the time the sun went down. And it wasn't spelled out even. It was this kind of implicit understood thing. And you know, I grew up in the Northeast for most of my life, in New York and New England and tri-state area. And that's where you see or don't see a lot of the racism. It's much more ingrained in that society to be quiet, to be kind of a more insidious kind of racism, because yes, the South has its share of racist tendencies. You know, this event, this killing, this atrocity occurred in the South, but that doesn't mean there aren't people in the North, in the Mountain West or the Pacific West Coast that don't share these same feelings. It's a much more insidious, quiet form of racism.
Yeah, I'm not sure what would actually be worse. If it's more and more, I relate to what Dave Chappelle said 12 years ago, where he was like, I find it refreshing to go to the South with the racism being out in the open. Right. He's like, hey, boy, get off my porch. He's like, hey, I know where I stand with that dude.
Right.
As opposed to not being able to get a bank loan in Ohio. Like, is it worse to be completely known to be marginalized, or to be told that you're an equal member of society, but your chances of getting employed are much lower, your chances of getting a mortgage are much lower, your chances of being profiled are much higher, your chances of going to jail for ridiculous nonsense is much higher?
Yeah, I'd rather know where I stand.
I'd be interested in hearing like a survey of Black people. Like, what would you prefer? Obviously, nobody wants to be a slave. Nobody wants to not be able to vote. Nobody wants to be able to not own property. But at least it's more honest. This is just like, no, I don't value, I marginalize you, as opposed, I mean, you can find studies everywhere of somebody who, his name was DeMarcus Johnson, and he applied for jobs and wasn't getting anything. And then he just changed it to Marcus Johnson. And oh, look, he's getting calls back.
Right.
Like, there's studies that have been done
phone
for decades.
Right.
Yeah, calling in for straight people, gay people, Black people, Latino people.
Rentals,
like, yes, it's harder to combat, because it's insidious, because there's no explicit ghettos anymore, but there's damn sure de facto ghettos.
Right.
There's not too many white people living in the 5th Ward in Houston.
Right.
And these things just get institutionalized over time, and now they're institutions. How do you fight an institution?
Yeah. And
you can't picket an institution, like down with mortgages. Like, how do you?
Yeah. And that's the thing that really, really is frustrating, because I do feel like as a country, we're on the precipice of something good, right? We have gay rights proliferating. We have tolerance. There are steps that we were taking as a society, and I really think what happens is government likes that divisiveness. It's easier to divide and conquer. It's easier to keep people marginalized, to keep them segregated into groups, not necessarily physically, but at least sociologically or politically, because it's easier to tackle those different groups of people and sell them what they want, or pitch them what they want to hear. So, I feel like people, as Americans, people from any country, inherently have that quality within them to be good. They have to be taught not to. They have to be taught that hate. And it reminds me of the 1985 Mexico earthquake. In Mexico, there was a massive earthquake, and because of the way the sound waves, and I don't know, tectonic plates and all this stuff like that, but basically, depending on the depth of the earthquake and the pitch and the yaw and the roll and all that shit, some are way worse than others. And this was a horrible one in 1985. And because of the state of the Mexican government at the time, especially in Mexico City, there was such rampant corruption and problems in that city, a city of 26 million people, that for the first 3 days after the earthquake, which tens of thousands of people lost their lives, thousands more were buried in rubble. There were no food. There was open gas leaks, and just it was atrocious. And yet there was no government response for the first 3 days. The people stopped what they were doing. The people who were safe, healthy, fine, went and started creating de facto boards to collect food and supplies, to get tools to dig people out. And until the government came in and ironically blocked the people from helping and didn't allow anyone to help, they actually were an impediment before they ever did anything. People were able to, on their own, solve problems and to band together and help each other out. And I think that we have the capacity for that, but government structures, being what they are, really are an impediment for us to get along more. And voting is difficult. You have special interest that says my $10 million contribution is my vote, and that makes our voices unequal. My one vote and that $10 million vote. And so I think it has to come down to campaign finance reform, which won't get off the ground. So it gets a little bit hopeless.
Yeah, I mean, that classic quote, I'm a repository of other people's insights. The only thing that's required for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing.
Right. Right.
And so technically what we're doing right now is nothing. Venting our grievances over the air is fine, but that doesn't bring any black people back to life. That doesn't prevent any black people from being killed, doesn't prevent any white people from being killed, or gay kids or straight kids. And yeah, man, I mean, that Bill Hicks routine from like 25 years ago, where he talked about, let me describe politics in America to you. It's like, oh, I think the puppet on the left best represents my views. Oh, I think that Howdy Doody on the right best represents my values. It's like, wait a minute, the same corporate interest is controlling both puppets. That was 25 years ago, and that was before Citizens United, which allowed corporations to donate unlimited amounts of money. So you've got the more entrenched interests become more entrenched, the pharmaceutical industry, the gun industry, the tobacco industry, because they can just give, instead of giving 10 million or 25,000 to their candidate, they can now give 10 million to each party. It's like, so no matter which, they don't give a shit who's in power as long as their interest is protected. So it's a guarantee that somebody who owes them is going to get elected, and then they will have their interests served.
I like
it's
that.
It's just so blatant and transparent. It's like, at a certain point, man, you just got to burn it down and just build something better.
And that's something that I think about in a non-action kind of way, because we live in a time where anything looking at all like dissent or transgressive behavior is deemed terroristic or terrorist. And that, I think, is the problem. Is the United States has done such a good job at creating a climate of, hey, we are on this path, and if you veer away from that path, you are going to be swept up in this net of dissent. And it's unfortunate because in the age of the war on terrorism, there isn't room for true dissent or true political social protest. It gets swept up in a net of, hey, well, you're threatening the homeland, right? And that's the problem, is between the fact that we are so well entertained, right? We have our cell phones. We
Netflix.
Tap away at the games, and we have this tether which keeps us entertained constantly. People can't get that mad because it doesn't affect their status quo. And I unfortunately think that's what it's going to take, is the status quo to change until people are going to get mad enough to do something about it.
Well, it's interesting too. It's like, as long as the demographics in this country keep shifting, eventually voting will carry the day by virtue of majority rules. I forget what it is, 2030 or something, where it's going to be more than 50% of the population in this country is Latino.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, if this shit keeps happening, the reckoning might not happen today, it might not happen tomorrow. But as soon as there's a majority of what used to be a minority, those interests are going to start getting represented in a big way.
Right.
All it takes is a few people in that demographic to mobilize that voting block. You see it all the time with unions. You see it with local elections. As soon as it gets more dispersed, the electoral system being what it is, as soon as those people start spreading out more, I mean, you see, what is it, in some crap hole in Michigan has the biggest population of Lebanese people outside of Lebanon in the world.
Right.
So, and you would never think like, oh, Lebanese people to Michigan, let's go from our sunny beach paradise to a frozen crap hole in the Midwest.
Right.
But these things tend to happen organically. So over time, as the electoral system gets upended by, okay, now there's a lot more brown and black people in that system than used to be there. It'll get changed that way, but that's decades in the making. It just, it shouldn't, and we shouldn't have to wait for white people to not be the majority in order for there to be equality under the law, which is what we're supposedly founded on as a country anyway. It's just disheartening.
And I feel like, there may be social reform in that case where there's true reform for immigration and true reform to the rights of Latino people if they become a majority. Of course, when they become a majority, their interests will be better represented. But who's to say that those people in government who may be more skewed towards a larger population of Latino demographics, they're still on the take, and they're still responsible to the people who elect them. And I mean, one of the
then the Carniceria special interest will be the big lobbying interest in the country.
Right. And I remember my parents talking about when JFK was elected, there was a legitimate fear that the Vatican was going to be in the White House because he was Catholic. He was
a dirty Catholic. That's right.
So there's this xenophobia and there's this fear. And the thing that really frustrates me is, is, first of all, this is something we've talked about, is the President Obama is a centrist, very much so.
He's a political animal.
Right. And he does really well to push, I think, a really fair agenda.
He's great at campaigning, not so great at following through on that campaign. To
my point, right after his second term, he said, well, you know, I'm not going to make any changes from the inside. You're going to have to do it from the outside. And I'm thinking, what the fuck? Like, this is what you campaigned on.
Hope and change.
Get me in and I'll make change.
Yeah.
And then the second term promise was, well, I haven't been able to do something. To be fair, I mean, just a stone wall from Republican Congress, supermajority.
Well, you could have predicted that. He had a supermajority, did shit with it, and they were like, we better keep that uppity Negro from doing anything while he's in office. Now that we finally managed to get control back,
right?
And he didn't do anything when he had the mandate and he had the people behind him. Which, say what you will about W, but he had the mandate and he's like, I'm gonna do whatever the fuck I want. If you don't like it, elect somebody else. It's like, that's what I respect that a little bit. It was like, I'm gonna kowtow to my corporate sugar daddies, and I'm gonna protect the interests that got me here, because that's what I'm here to do. Like, I respect that more. Like, I respect, not respect, but I can deal with it better. Open racism, open corruption. You hear somebody like, yeah, I took it. I used to work for an Italian corporation, and we had a slush fund on the books that was specifically for bribes on international jobs. And that's just the culture of how it's done. If you don't bribe the minister's brother-in-law of the Department of Rare Earths in Nigeria, you're not getting the bid.
Right.
So you either can cry about it, you can set up a coup d'etat in Nigeria, or you can play the game and get your bid and make your money. So that's the point where I'm hitting, because you and I, in our offline interests are on the verge of some pretty staggering success. It's like, I'm going to use that to protect my family and my friends and support the causes that I care about directly. St. Jude's, the Wounded Warrior Foundation, and everybody else. Good fucking luck. I'm going to keep my best friend lives in Central Oregon on like a redneck end of days compound. He's got generators and canned food and like a 600-foot deep well. And if the lights go off tomorrow and the currency becomes worth as much as the ruble, he'll be fine until 2100. I'm going to be living in his insulated tool shed and just living my days out there. So I've got my go bag is ready, is set, and my escape hatch is covered. But for everybody else, I don't know what you do.
Yeah, and as much as it's become a romantic notion in pop culture, I don't know how romantic it is, but the idea of apocalypse, the idea of society ending, disaster, is becoming more and more of a reality if you look at the scenarios that are potential. I mean, if you look at our alliance with Taiwan on the books right now, the way it's written is if China does invade Taiwan, the United States is committed to a full armed response with no limit to that. Could be complete nuclear. So from that to the fact that GMOs, genetically modified organisms, can literally grow rampant and overtake the globe with just unkillable weeds and germ bacterias. I mean, there's so many things that can occur, but do you think that's what it's going to take for us to be able to fix the system, is to scrap it, start over, and wear leather clothes that last all your life, to quote Chuck Palahniuk? It's
a good thing that we're friends with Trey. I'll just say that much. Of VegasBindery.com makes
Vegas Bindery.
Vegas Bindery for all your leatherworking needs. Yeah, man. I mean, let's be honest. I think the notion of apocalypse has always had traction in people's mindset, because it's the ultimate validation that you're special. It's like the society has ended. It's all about you now. You get to indulge.
You're the last generation.
Yeah, you're it. Like, you matter.
You're going down on the tight.
You matter.
Right. Yeah. It's a very egocentric notion that you're the last one.
Yeah,
you're turning the lights off on the way out. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So that has its appeal. I mean, I don't know how honest people are about it. I mean, I can joke about living in Central, or I'd probably last maybe 72 hours, like that old George Carlin bit. All you need to ensure the complete collapse of Western civilization is turn the power off for like a month.
Yeah,
it's like 2 weeks in. He's like, he has describes how like prisons open and people rampage out in the countryside, and we have a very thin veneer of civilization over our animal instincts, and that veneer is only preserved by police. Let's be honest. Yeah. There was those riots in Montreal in the 90s where the entire city police force went on strike for 3 days, caused like $100 million worth of damage in 72 hours because there were no cops around. And if people know that there's nobody with guns to make you not do something, what's your incentive to not do it?
Right.
We're apes, at our core. So, yeah, I mean, in an apocalyptic scenario, which makes us, feel special, and like it's us. I mean, at the end of the days, we'd all get wiped out, especially here in Nevada. I mean, if I'm lucky enough to make it to Oregon, I might have a shot. It's going to be a shitty life if you manage to live with no electricity, no running water, no ready access to medicine or food. You get sent back 150 years.
Yeah, a paper cut can kill you if it gets infected. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point to look at is how close we are as a society to just complete collapse. If you think about Los Angeles County gets their water. It's a desert. There's not enough water in its valley to support a meager population, let alone a thriving metropolis that's one of the largest and most robust cities in the world. Water from Los Angeles comes from as far east as Colorado. It's pumped in. We give them water. Water comes from Washington. And so if the pumps stop, if the electricity stops and the pumps stop, and there's no enforcement for, keeping order there, what happens when you don't have water? That's one of those three things you need.
You have resource riots.
Right. You need water, you need food, and you need shelter.
Yeah.
And what's the rule of three? You can last 3 days without water,
like 10 days without food.
Yeah, and then
indefinitely without shelter if you just you get out from the elements. But
that's the thing is, if you can't get out of the elements, you don't last very long. So you need that ability to protect yourself, especially out here in the desert. I mean, Fallout New Vegas is fun, and I can't wait for Fallout 4. Yeah,
coming November
this year. Ooh,
yeah, it's very exciting.
But yeah, this is not an ideal place to have to brave the apocalypse.
And I don't think too many people are going to try to brave it here. I mean, like I always say, I need about 14-hour head start on like some shit going down. There's 2 roads basically in and out of Vegas. I can get over to Oregon and I'll be fine. Just go north. Like people are going to be going to wherever, but nobody's invading Central Oregon. Like he's well equipped. It's going to be a shitty life, but at least it'd be better equipped than try to get every crate of bottled water from Smith's here before everybody else does. Like that's one of the reasons I'm not getting rid of my SUV. If I need to go off road in that bad boy, I can. It'll be slow progress. I'll need to bring 100 gallons of gas with me to make it, but I can make it. So yeah, it's I don't know, man. I mean, the system is, hopefully this is kind of like the last vestiges of the old shit. This kid who shot at the church was 21, so obviously there's always going to be people like that.
Right.
Ted Bundy had a great upbringing. He was just a psychopath, and he was insane, and he was a bad person, and there's nothing that can be done about that. There will always be the bad seeds, but I'm hopeful that it's kind of tied to that a societal version of that Gandhi's old saw about nonviolent resistance. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. So hopefully we're just in that the fighting stage where, right, as the demographics continue to swell of ethnic minorities, of people with different sexual orientations, hopefully that undercurrent of what's been suppressed. It's not socially acceptable to be openly homophobic or openly racist. So that sentiment is still there, shoved down by the previous generations. Hopefully this is the last vestiges of the shit bubbling up before we're able to overcome and move on. I don't know if that's realistic or naive, but I'm hopeful that that's somewhat the case.
To look at the flip side of that, though, and something that scares me is that, yes, this person, I don't even say their name or acknowledge them, but they were 21. They are 21. Yes, that speaks to their possible naivete, their inexperience, their lack of whatever. I'm not going to use that as a justification. It's never justified to kill another person.
It's sometimes justified to kill another person. It's justified to kill that fucker.
Right. No, it's yeah. I mean, it's his actions are not justified.
Yeah.
In no way can be justified. But what scares me is he's a millennial. This is the generation that supposedly, quote unquote, is colorblind, that sees race as less of an issue.
Well, nobody anywhere is entirely colorblind. It's just the vast majority is coming up without the hate.
Right.
Part of the problem is the iconography of the South. I think it was John Stewart. It was like, well, the roads are named after Civil War generals who were pro-slavery. The Confederate flag flies over the State House. Like, it's the reminder of bondage and human suffering is everywhere.
Yeah.
And that shit needs to go. You can criticize certain aspects of it. I always like Germany's policy of it's a crime to be a Holocaust denier. It's a crime to display Nazi iconography.
Yeah.
And I don't think
we forget, you know,
yeah,
we're doomed to repeat it.
I don't think it's necessary that we do that here. I just like that they put those restrictions in it. I like that Iceland put their bankers in jail after the economy collapsed. They're like, you directly contributed it, X, Y, and Z infractions, prison to you. Right. And it's, you know, it's obviously easier for a small economy to recover than an economy like ours, but their economy bounced back by about 2011, 2012. They were doing fine. Ours is just now staggering back to its feet.
Yeah, I mean, a black man in the United States steals a pack of cigarettes from the store, he might get shot. A banker steals billions of dollars like AIG, and there is no policy. There is no punishment.
Yeah,
it's
you have to pay a fine. You don't admit wrongdoing, so the fine and the legal fees accompanying it are a tax write-off.
Right.
So you return 10% of what you stole, and you get to keep 90%, and the 10% you return as a tax break. So basically, you're rewarded 100% for stealing. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? I mean, that's how the incentive. That's how the system incentives are set up. Why wouldn't you? There's a reason that Wall Street traders for the last 30 years have historically been incredibly aggressive, narcissistic, borderline psychopaths, because that behavior is rewarded.
Absolutely. Yeah, I worked there for 2 years, and it was like a fraternity, you know, more so than the front campus lawn at MIT. It had that virile kind of alpha male quality of you do more, you take more, you steal more, you act aggressive, and you're going to be rewarded. And I think that really is what this whole problem comes down to, is as long as we have a system that allows these things to happen or doesn't punish them sufficiently, the problems are going to keep repeating themselves. And short of being a dictatorial police state, we need to change policies. We need to limit access to guns in a way that is realistic and really gets past that "don't take my gun away" from, you know, you're gonna have to pry it out of my cold dead hands. Those maxims, which are just so childish and juvenile, and are the last vestiges of just this kind of old mentality. And we need to figure out a way to come out with some common sense and some realistic ways to prevent these behaviors that are abhorrent.
Yeah, I mean, I forget which comedian it was, really brilliant bit about defending TSA, basically, and like airport security. People like to bitch and moan, and people love to whip out that old Ben Franklin saying that people who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. And he was like, first of all, Ben Franklin owned slaves.
Yeah.
Second of all, Ben Franklin never had to deal with being 30,000 feet in the sky, and if somebody fucks with it, like, you plunge to your death.
Right.
Like, the situation has changed. So yeah, there needs to be effective deterrence. I mean, that's how you get raised properly as an adult in society in the first place, is deterrence for unwanted behaviors. Yeah. Now, whatever that is, like, I got my ass whooped and I had to run laps in my backyard, and it worked for me. Now, whether, you know, you can be a soft, whiny crybaby and just put your kids in timeout and take away their iPad, or whatever the system is that works for you, fine. But the point is, there's deterrence, and they work. If you incentivize bad behavior, like if you say you have two kids, and like the smaller kid steals a candy bar and you spank him bloody, and the bigger kid steals a bunch of shit from a store, steals $10,000 worth of stuff versus $10 worth of stuff, and you effectively reward them, what kind of message does that send? It's a terrible message to send. It's not going to be effective. Like, the small kid isn't going to respond effectively to your discipline in the future. He's just going to try to become like the big kid so he can get away with it. And the big kid's like, well, sweet, if this is what I'm allowed to get away with, I'm just going to keep doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not properly incentivizing people to do the right thing, then there's no reason they're going to do the wrong thing. People will continue to do what is possible because that's who we are as animals. Is that's evolutionarily, it's social Darwinism, is get that advantage over your fellow man. And I mean, that's, there's that push-pull in inherent in all of us, is protect your family and protect your fellow man. But it becomes so isolated to your direct surroundings. People have empathy and compassion for one another, but it often is limited to people who they're related to, people who are in their very close vicinity or proximity, or people who look or act like them. And what that creates is a system where we can dehumanize those who are different than us. That's how all war works, is by dehumanizing an enemy.
Us versus them.
Us versus them. And our government has gotten really good at making a lot of us's versus a lot of them's, and kind of fractionalizing people to where it's easy to control them, to keep them interested in doing what makes the politicians money and power. And it's really unfortunate.
It's the apathy of the majority, man. I mean, the voting numbers of when was the last time they were over 50%?
Yeah.
If people don't vote, if people don't participate, you know, you can have the Russell Brand argument, a lot of other arguments like, well, the two-party system doesn't work. The only thing that really is going to impact your day-to-day is most likely the local government, and who gives a shit who the county comptroller is.
Right. Yeah.
You know, until the status quo affects you personally, who cares about the status quo? You've got bills to pay, you've got things to do, you've got relationships to maintain and budgets to balance, and you know, there's more pressing concerns that affect your life. Now, and you look at this against the macro backdrop of global climate change, and there's this article this week about like a sixth extinction level event coming for the planet, where the vast majority of species may or may not die off. Like, okay, well, you know, it just makes me at a certain point withdraw. You know, like, again, these problems are systemic and these problems are intractable, it seems to me. I don't know what it's going to take to change them, and I would like them to change, but I don't know what to do. So I therefore do nothing, focus on our businesses, make money, and then go to Thailand. Right? Good luck, everybody. Like, you know, every timeline I've seen says we got like 60, 70 good years left of America swirling the economic drain of the planet. You know, it seems like the teeter-totter wobbles faster and faster, but it's still maintaining some sort of equilibrium. As long as it doesn't spin off the axis, as long as I'm alive, tough shit. I don't have kids. I've got nieces and godchildren, and I'll do my best to provide for them and set them up, and maybe just buy them some, you know, UV ray reflective suits, you know, a life raft. But I don't know, man. Yeah. I mean, nothing. When you feel powerless or you're helpless against these institutional forces, even though all of us banding together collectively can do something about it, good luck getting 7 distinct geographic regions plus 350 million people to come to any kind of consensus.
Yeah.
Banks are bad. Okay, well, what do you change? How do you change it? Then you get into those Byzantine 5-foot deep textbooks full of laws, and it's like, fuck, man, why should the tax code really be 10,000 pages? Probably not. Yeah. But where do you start?
Yeah. And anthropologists and sociologists, they often look at the Roman Empire as a kind of example by which to compare other empires, and whether people want to acknowledge it or not, the United States is an empire. We have garrisoned the globe with over 216 bases around the world.
50,000 troops in Germany because, you know, the Krauts might rise again. Right. Like, no, they just want to sell us cars at this point. Why do we have 50,000 people, 50,000 troops in Germany?
And anyone who says the United States is not an empire, look at Puerto Rico, look at Guam, look at Saipan, look at the U.S. Virgin Islands, you know,
American Samoa.
The United States has several territories, but we've always been really good at PR. It's always been, oh, you know, we're going to go in there and spread democracy, as opposed to what the British did, which is, well, we're going to just spread our Britishness.
We like tea.
Yeah.
We're coming for you, India, because we like tea.
Right. So looking at the United States as an empire, which, you know, it's not necessarily axiomatic, but it's easy to debate and show how it is.
Or hegemony, for sure.
Right. So looking at it compared to the Roman Empire, most anthropologists show us in those declining years. And what really set Rome past that point of no return is when Caligula, I believe, took away the games, closed the Colosseum and took away the games. And that's when people said, fuck this, we are not going to do this anymore. We're going to go to the streets with pitchforks and axes and everything like that.
I forget what the Latin phrase is, like panem et circuitus or something. It basically translates literally to bread and circus, food and entertainment.
Right.
You keep people fed, you keep the people entertained, and you'll have no problems. You can do whatever you want because they're fed and they're comfortable. So as soon as the people get indolent and lazy, and the leadership gets more and more corrupt, it kind of starts its own teeter-totter wobble of eventually something's going to spark a conflagration.
Yeah.
You know, there's that classic visual of Nero fiddling while Rome burned. You know, eventually maybe the special interest groups will just have their offshore tax shelters and go live in the Bahamas and just leave the poor people to riot in the mainland. But I don't know what the alternative is, man.
Yeah. So I think it's what it's going to take to if nothing else to have Rome burn is take away people's entertainment. And
but that's the thing, entertainment's not going to get taken away.
Right. As we
Netflix isn't going anywhere.
Last week we talked about just how how much entertainment is out there and how there's such a push for content. And it really contextualizes why that happens, because at a macro level, people are entertained, they're pretty docile. They don't mind the fact that a politician has taken something away from them if they can still watch TV, play video games.
Netflix is $8 a month. $8 a month. You could flip burgers for 3 hours and afford that after taxes.
Yeah.
So the threshold of being entertained and fed is so low. Food is so cheap. Entertainment is so cheap. You have access with the internet. You can pay your $60 a month for internet, your $30 for your cell phone plan, your $8 for Netflix, and your rent and whatever. And for less than $1,000 a month, you can live like an emperor from 1,000 years ago. All the food you want, all the entertainment you want, and you don't have to leave your house. You don't have to import slaves to dance for you and feed you grapes. You can get your own grapes. Yeah. You can all the entertainment they had without leaving your couch. You just point and click, and you have thousands of hours, thousands of, let's be honest, years of entertainment at your disposal. That's just television and movies. You had in books, you had in music. You have the entire sum of what we've managed to produce as a civilization at your disposal in your house for $8, maybe $200 a month, all in. Like, what is your motivation to give a shit about a state you've never been to and probably never will go to? Most of us in our lifetimes are not going to go to South Carolina. So I can be in my mind like, well, yes, I care on principle. I don't know anybody from South Carolina. I'm probably never going to go to South Carolina. So it doesn't really impact my life. I'm not black. I'm not religious. It doesn't really impact my life. So it's so much easier to just remain unmoved by stuff, or just be like, oh, I'm going to make like a Facebook post or go on a radio show and be sad and mad. And they're like, well, I feel better now because I got my anger out. Back to Fallout 4. Yeah. So I mean, you really have to be a self-starter, or have like a lot of those people who signed up and joined the military after 9/11. People tend to overlook how much support there was for America on the global scale right after the events of September 11th, 2001. I had friends who lived abroad. I had relatives who were abroad, and who just the outpouring of support, because to that point we'd been a relatively good citizen for other people. And we had our issues interfering in Sarajevo, and Clinton's doing his bombing to cover up, the fact he got a blowjob. Like we had inklings of like
Mogadishu.
We had inklings of the culture that developed, but nobody gave a shit about those places. To this day, we could probably bomb Mogadishu flat, nobody would care. Right. That place is a god awful shithole. But there hadn't been that imperialistic culture yet, where it doesn't matter why or how we were doing it. It matters how the rest of the world perceives how and why we were doing it. Exactly. So we can say we're doing it to spread freedom. They hate our freedom. Well, that's not what anybody else in the world perceives. And that's the problem. So, it's kind of like how politicians used to be trusted 150 years ago. And nowadays, not so much. America the same way in the larger global culture. But again, who cares how I'm perceived in South Korea or Ireland or the UK or Scandinavia? I'm not going to go there. They can't impact my life. What's the worst Switzerland can do? Bump the price of chocolate a little bit? Like, they can't do anything to us. Like, we're entrenched enough at this point in our financial, place at the head of the financial table globally is still there enough that we don't have to listen to what other people say or think about us.
And conversely, most world markets are still drastically affected by any uptick or downtick in United States markets. I mean, the Dow is over 17,000. I remember not so long ago when it was unbelievable that it was pushing 10,000 and then 11,000. So there are still a market financial interest in American markets and growth. And we have the ability to keep doing what we want and not giving a damn for a long time.
And I'm honestly close to that point. My goddaughters are little brown girls, and they don't look remotely white, your stereotypical quote unquote American, even though, let's be honest, the only original Americans are the same color as they are. The copper skinned people who we obliterated and then locked into shitty, desert, the opposite of what an oasis is. And then, they can have casinos. Well, now we got to take away their casinos. They can't have anything. But I look at them and I'm like, thank God you're attractive. I mean, it sucks. It's a shitty way to think, but it's like, well, okay, they've got the disadvantage of coming from a different ethnic background of Filipino and Native American. But they can pass for Latino, so that's good. Latina, I should say, and they're attractive. So they've got a leg up that they can leverage to get to a good place in society, even independent of them being very intelligent, motivated young women, which they are. But I look at them and I'm like, I'll do what I can for you. I'll try and send them to, I pay to put them in private school. I got their college, all set up. So if they're motivated, they'll be able to succeed. I'm setting them up to be able to succeed. But people who don't have somebody like that in their life, somebody who doesn't have the advantages that I was given, that you were given, I don't know what they do, man. Because that bootstrap myth is dead now. There's a couple of industries left where you can, start off sweeping floors and end up running the company. That's 99% of myth now. So
yeah, absolutely. The upward mobility in the United States workplace is still better than most countries, but is not what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Yeah, you're like, okay, so Hillary's going to run now, and she's just as married to Wall Street as any fucking head of the SEC or Goldman Sachs. So that's not going to bring about any changes. So for my instinct is just bunker down. I'll support the causes that I can directly impact and change. We hire people of different sexual orientations and genders and ethnic backgrounds in our businesses. I'm going to be the change that I want to see in the world, and I'm going to try and keep the world the fuck away from me.
Yeah. All right. For Daniel Lowber, I'm John Douglas. This is Black Mountain Radio. Thanks for listening, guys.
Life is hopeless. We're all going to die.
Yeah, very